the thing with the Facebook depression, which was reported as a true condition, it was really never more than speculation. Is it true that teenagers with depression are on social media? Yeah, that's true. Is it true that teenagers with depression are on social media and have bad experiences and it makes their experience worse? Yeah, of course. But is it true that like Facebook causes depression? No, it's not. That's not a verifiable thing. If you simplify a problem, you're unable to identify proper solutions. When that problem got simplified down to Facebook causes depression, it led some parents to conclude that I got to get my kid off of Facebook. But a teenager could have depression, could be on Facebook, and could have found a very productive community who could be really useful to them. If you simplify the problem down to Facebook equals causing depression, you're possibly taking a useful tool away from these teenagers, which is why we just have to have more complex understandings of these things and treat them as more complex.
Welcome to Successful with ADHD. I'm Brooke Schnittman. Let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Successful with ADHD. Today, I have the pleasure of hosting Jason Feifer, who is the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, a podcast host, book author, keynote speaker, startup advisor, and nonstop optimism machine. His goal is to help you become more resilient and adaptable in a world of constant change so you can seize new opportunity before anyone else does. I love that. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on. And I also had the pleasure to meet you in person. And I know what you speak about is authentic and very knowledge-based. I really wanted you on here today because, and please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I saw something on social media that you posted. There was a fire in your neighborhood. You posted pictures. I think you thanked the firefighters. And some random person commented, well, if the firefighters were only there sooner, ...
Yeah, that's more or less correct. So the setup is that I live in Brooklyn, New York, and I live in an area, it's a lot of standalone houses, but they're all like narrow and very tight together. And a couple, I mean, this might have been 3 or 4 weeks ago now, but it was around 5 p.m. I was wrapping up the workday, and my wife yells for me because there's a fire behind our house. You know, what is basically a block away from us, but like the houses whose backs are facing our house, like behind and maybe 2 to the left is on fire, and like on fire. Like, you know, I don't know that I've ever actually seen a house fire that close.
Flames.
Like, yes, like just like consumed. Like the house is on fire, and so she just saw it out the window, and she was calling 911, but she didn't know the address. You know, so I just threw my shoes on and I just ran around the block to get to the house so I could find the address. I text the address to my wife, but really like 30 seconds later, the first firefighters show up, or somebody had beat her to calling 911. So now I'm just there. And so I watched the very first firefighters get out of the fire truck and just get to work, you know? I mean, just get to work. A couple of them like go at the fire, and then a couple more of them just go into the house. You know, it's like kind of crazy to see somebody just go into the house. The house is on fire. We're going into the house, you know? And this is what they do.
Risking their
Amazing
life.
professionals.
Yeah.
Right. And so I just take a quick video of this to show my wife and kids. And then after a minute or two, you know, more fire trucks come, right? Like this isn't the only one, but it was the first one that showed up. And then I run home and I stand out in my backyard with a hose in the event that the fire spreads or some flaming ember or something comes towards us. And while I'm doing this, I decide to post that video that I took, which just shows these couple firefighters, like, you know, with a hose in front of this fire. I just posted on Twitter, or X. I'm going to just keep calling it Twitter. And most people responded with appropriate concern. But there's this one guy who's an anonymous. He's anonymous on Twitter. He goes by Ned Isakoff, which I looked it up, is actually just like an obscure Seinfeld character. So I'm just going to use the fake name. So Ned tweets, "Why were they not preventing fire from spreading? Inexcusable. They were all moving slow and had no leadership." And I got to say, like, that tweet I know that anonymous idiocy is a central feature of Twitter, but that tweet really bothered me because for the next couple hours, what I watched was ultimately more than 100 firefighters and emergency responders swarming this neighborhood, people risking their lives. The fire spread to another house. I mean, basically, it had spread by the time the first fire truck had shown up because these houses are so tightly packed together. They stopped it from spreading any further, and they put this thing out. And one woman actually died. She was trapped in the house. She died. So to see this guy say this, what he didn't understand, I mean, he didn't understand so many things, but like to start is that he saw a short video that I had taken from truly the first minute or two that these firefighters had shown up. And then he just assumed that he knew everything there was to know about this situation. And he's looking at them and he's like, why aren't they preventing the fire from spreading? They're moving slow. There's no leadership. And it's like, no, you dick. Like first of all, like those were the first guys that arrived. So you don't know when this was taken. They are basically assessing the situation. Like they don't know anything. They just showed up and they're figuring it out. And some of them, not knowing anything, have already gone into the house. And like, how dare you judge without seeing the full situation? And then it got me thinking, as I suppose you saw, because I wrote this in my newsletter, it got me thinking about how we all do some version of this where we take a small amount of information that we have, and then we basically fill in the rest of the story for ourselves. And then we take that story as truth. And the lesson that I wanted people to take away from it was, whenever we see anything that we don't have the complete picture on, and this could be something we see online or in the news or anything, or it could just be interpersonal, that, like, Brooke, I call you and you don't call me right
answer,
back.
You
right.
Hate
Yeah.
me.
Like, yeah. Right. Do you hate me? Are you avoiding me? Like we take a small amount of information and we fill in the rest of the story based on however it is that we are feeling or whatever our biases are. And that just generally leads to bad assumptions and bad outcomes. And so I wish that Ned in that moment had just asked himself, what don't I know about this situation? Just that would be a really useful question. What don't I know about this situation? And the answer is like everything, right? You don't know anything about this. You don't know when this video was taken. You don't know what the fire situation was like. Like, you don't know anything about this situation. All you know is that there's a building on fire and there are a couple firefighters there. You don't know anything else. So as soon as you can recognize what you don't know about the situation, same with the example with you. I call Brooke and she doesn't return my call. What don't I know about this? Everything. I don't know what else is going on in your life. I don't know what you were doing that day. I don't even know if you got the call.
I have ADHD and I forgot, right? Called you a month later.
I don't know. So I can't start making decisions and assumptions based on the story that I have functionally made up in my head.
Yeah. Well, I totally appreciate that. And in your book, Build for Tomorrow, I know that you have a systematic approach in questioning yourself and like figuring out solutions without making assumptions. And you also talk about the fear of loss, how we're hardwired very often to think that way. Daniel Kahneman talks about that. So where do you think, and again, there's so much valuable information in your book, Build for Tomorrow. Luckily, you gave me a signed copy. I have it. I've read it a few times. I shared it with my friends and my clients. Where do you think this guy was in all of this? You also talk about the 4-step theory of Sisyphean cycle of technology panics. Where is he in all this?
Well, so look, let's ask the question that I asked a second ago. What don't we know here? And the answer is almost everything. I don't know anything about this guy. I don't know anything. But let's take some of the things that you just talked about, and we can at least build out just sort of a couple, like maybe just a useful theory of the case. So the book that you're describing here, Build for Tomorrow, that's my book. You can get it for anywhere for anybody who's interested. Audiobook, ebook, hardcover. And it's a book about how to navigate change and how to find opportunity in change, and how to develop a unique personal relationship with change, how to understand it and your own relationship with it. And you described the four phases. I argue that all change happens in four phases: panic, adaptation, new normal, and wouldn't go back. And then the book dives into a lot of like sort of how change impacts us and how people generally react to change. You talked about loss. I argue that we equate change with loss. So when something changes in our lives or our work, we often immediately think of the thing that we're losing as a result of that. And because we, as humans, our brains are hardwired to protect against loss more than to seek gain. It's called loss aversion theory. Decades of psychological research confirm. This is, when change happens, we get pretty spooked and we feel a sense of deep loss, and that can lead to a sense of panic. And when you're panicking, you're not acting rationally. And some of the other stuff like the Sisyphean cycle of tech panic is sort of like an interesting example of how that gets applied societally when society is reacting to new technologies. But let's just take a guess. I mean, look, I about Ned, and again, to be very clear, I don't know anything about Ned, but I'm gonna fill in at least one gap based on what I've generally found to be true, which is that if somebody is defaulting to negative, it's often because something is missing or has gone wrong in their lives. And so if somebody is a troll online, something's missing, something's happening, something bad is happening in their lives. They could be very lonely, they could be very frustrated, they could have not achieved what they want to achieve, they could have been rejected. People don't just naturally
become that way.
Yeah, it's not a thing, and it's not a thing that a lot of people do just for fun. It's usually because it's filling a gap somewhere. I don't know what that person's gap is. And look, I could also be wrong. I don't know anything about this person, but based on the stories that I've seen and play out and the people that I've interacted with, and I've had people reach out to me who are very negative, and sometimes I engage them in conversation, and I discover they're very unhappy. That guy is very unhappy, and I don't know why, but whatever it has taught him to see something happening and assume that something is wrong, assume that there's something missing. There's something nefarious or something incompetent that's happening underneath the thing that he's seeing. And that's really unfortunate. It's not the way that I want to see the world. But it's the way that a lot of people do.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I definitely want to go into, how that fear, that irrational thinking in just a little bit. But I also wanted to bring you on because as someone who lives with ADHD, who helps people with ADHD, and someone who's written plenty of, news stories and, shares so much information out there on platforms. With ADHD, we're energized by stressful situations. Unfortunately, they produce dopamine. So negative thoughts produce dopamine. Positive thoughts produce dopamine. Sticky headlines also produces dopamine. We have justice sensitivity. So we, for the perceived underdogs, want to make things right. We're not always the best readers due to coexisting learning conditions, focusing our attention on decoding words and retaining information. Just takes a lot of executive functioning skills to fact check a story and go back and forth and see what's accurate, what's missing, what don't we know, all of that information. So I'm curious, you had mentioned some strategies on how to figure out what we don't know. But just as a general consensus, do you see, because you mentioned in your book, Build for Tomorrow, that there's connections to history to Build for Tomorrow. So do you see history repeating itself or really human behavior repeating itself as it relates to fears and news stories?
Yeah, certainly. I think, and so thanks for that really helpful context. And I'll just say, as a caveat for everything that I'm going to say going forward, is I don't have ADHD, and I don't understand it the way that you do. I'm no authority there. But what I do know is a lot about how people navigate change and business and technology and the way that systems tend to function. So if you ask about history, I'm very interested in history. And the reason that I'm interested in history is because we don't know how the stories today are going to play out, either in the news or in our own lives. Like, just whatever is happening, I don't know the end of that story. But if you look back in history, you actually can see the end of the story. You can see what happened based on decisions. And it's pretty interesting and useful. It's also useful to see how the things that we are experiencing now echo throughout history, to understand that the things that we're experiencing now are not generally original. They're not the first time that we've faced them, and they're usually not as dire as we often like to make them out to be. So you're asking about, for example, what you're really asking about is trust of information. And so, let's go back. Samuel Morse was the creator of the first commercially available telegraph, which is to say the very first time in human history, that information could move faster than a physical object. Just consider that. It's wild for Samuel Morse, and the story of Samuel Morse is actually kind of wonderful. And sounds like a tangent, but I promise it won't be. Samuel Morse is a painter, and he lives in New England somewhere or something. And he comes down to DC for business. While he's in DC, he gets a message, which is to say that a person has shown up with a piece of paper, and they've ridden a horse from New England to DC. And it took a while. It's the only way to get information from one place to another is to write it down on a piece of paper and have a horse carry it, right? That his wife is deathly ill. And before he can do anything about this, he gets a second message on a horse, which is that his wife has died. And what he thinks is, if information could have gotten to him faster, he could have gotten back home and seen his wife before she died. This is what propels him to become an inventor and to ultimately create the world's first commercially viable telegraph, which is to say a wire that you can send information on through series of dots and dashes. So he creates Morse code in 1837, and that's the first time that you can send information from DC to Maine like that. It's kind of magic, right? Like Samuel Morse could not have envisioned this, but almost immediately, this starts to raise questions about truthfulness of information, because somebody can send somebody else a wire. Where did it come from? Is the information correct? Newspapers start printing things that are wired to them, but they're not true. People are sending reports of armies on the move, and newspapers are printing them and getting everybody worked up about possible war. And it's not true. Somebody just made it up. So, you think, oh, we're dealing with this kind of information crisis. We've always been dealing with an information crisis. Always. It's not a new thing.
Fascinating.
Our need to engage with it and to be smart about how to navigate it and how to understand what information is trustworthy, that's a worthwhile conversation to always be having. But don't think like you're the first person in human history to have faced this, because that makes it scarier. That makes it mean like, oh, maybe there's no solution to this. Maybe, it's like aliens have come down and I don't know how to solve it. No, we've been doing this for literal hundreds of years. We've been having this conversation. So it's worth having. But let's put it in context. It's not a new one, and we'll get through it just as we have in the past.
I love that. So basically, we could use history. Things might end differently, but nothing is new here. So because there was information that was received via telegram, and then it turned into different ways of spreading information that was real or not real, like how do we decipher between fiction and nonfiction news stories and information?
All right, let me first just offer one more bridge from history, and then we'll just talk about the experience today. The mistake that people generally make about introductions of new technologies is that they think some things are fixed and some things are variable. Here's an example. Right now, we're having a conversation about deep fakes. AI generated voice, video, images. How can people trust it? Generally, the way that people talk about deep fakes is, oh, well, how will we ever know now? And nobody's going to know what's real or what's not. That is based on the belief that some things are fixed and some things are variable. The things that are fixed in this scenario is how we process and distribute information, right? We're kind of imagining our current world and our current models. And then we're saying, but the technology is going to change. That's the variable. The technology will come better. It will create these deepfakes. So now how can our existing systems, the existing way, but when I say existing systems, I mean you checking social media and believing what you see on social media. That's an existing system, right? This can be personal as much as it can be national or international. We're thinking the existing systems will stay exactly the same and the technology will change. That's not true. That's not what happens. Nothing is fixed. Everything is a variable. Everything is a variable. So the information systems change. The way in which you interact with the information changes. The way in which you understand the information changes. The way in which the information is distributed changes. Today, a newspaper, at least if it's a responsibly run one, does not just print anything that somebody tells it. They just don't do that. What will happen as a result of deep fakes now? I don't know. I would guess that the starting point is going to be that there will be an increased skepticism of what you see online, which frankly sounds good to me. I don't think that we're skeptical enough of it. But if there's more and more fake things out there that are indistinguishable on first glance from real things, more people are going to have to start to think, I wonder if that's real. Maybe that's not real. That's healthy. That sounds like a good change, but that's also a variable. That's also a shift that's happening. That's not a static, right? That's not a fixed way of engaging with the information, because you're not engaging with the information the way that you did 10 years ago. You're changing. So let's give ourselves credit. We can adjust as we go. But now let's talk about, like what happens, what do we actually do on an individual basis? Look, there are people who study this for a living, like just this. And I'm not one of them, but I have a bunch of things to say about it. So the first thing that I think it's really important to understand is that most of the means of distribution of information, which is to say social media or cable news, they're not providing you with original source material. They're providing you with what somebody has to say about something or somebody's opinion on something. I never watch cable news. Like 0% of my time is cable news, but I would bet that if you turn on cable news at any time, what you're going to be served is people's opinions on things. What you are not going to be served is firsthand information, source material. What you'll find when you go to source material, which is available, it's just that sometimes it looks boring. Sometimes it's in the form of reports, is that the information that you get there is often at once simpler and more complex than whatever it is that you heard. It's often less scary. It's often calming. I'll give you an example. I was having a conversation recently. He was asking what I thought about voter ID laws. I was like, I don't want to talk about this because I don't know and you don't know. So why would we debate it? But let me go find some source material. So I did. I went back to Bill and I was like, look at this. Like, as it turns out, this is a far more nuanced conversation than like either side is actually having. But also once you look at original source material, it's also less freaky than it's like original source material and calm conversations don't really make for good arguments on cable news. And it's worth remembering the incentive structure of wherever you're getting information. Cable news is designed to keep you coming back to cable news. They have to make you feel like it's important that you watch this. I got to stay glued to this because otherwise ... I'll tell you what, I stopped watching that stuff years ago. Nothing bad has happened to me. Nothing bad has happened to me. The world continues to turn.
I stopped watching news in 2020. My husband told me that I think it was Robert Kiyosaki had mentioned that like your friend or a source that you trust, if it's really important, will tell you, and it's a time suck. So I stopped watching for the past 4 years as well.
It is. I mean, I'm not like ignorant of what's happening in the world, but I tend to want to focus on the things that are most relevant to me. Like last point that I'll make on like this scattered monologue is from Samuel Morris's Telegraph to now. There's never been a time in human history where it's been easier to access information. We don't need all that information. You just don't. You don't need it all, right? I'm not saying like stop information. Information's great. Put it all out there. But you personally, you don't need to spend your whole day consuming it. You just don't.
Sure.
There's other things for you to do.
Like live your life.
Like take care of the people who you love and who rely upon you. You need to make better decisions about the information that we're investing our time in, because just because it's there doesn't mean that you need to spend all your time with it.
So yeah, I Would second that. And thank you for all of that information. It's clear that a lot of people get more information, like you said, than they need. And a lot of the information is in bite-sized chunks on social media. But to fact check the information, to get it from multiple resources, resources that you trust. But I know in your book, you had mentioned the Facebook depression in 2011, right? Where the American Academy of Pediatrics published a paper called The Impact of Social Media on Children, Adolescents, and Families, and basically saying that Facebook was causing depression, but there was no research that proved that normal exposure to social media harms adolescents' psychological well-being.
They're actually there still isn't. That's
fascinating.
That's taken for granted now in the public conversation. There's no causational data to prove that. There's a lot of correlative speculation. There is no causational data. It just doesn't exist.
So what is it, do you think? Because, there's some fear and emotions right now. I feel it from my listeners. I feel it from people, my family, like Israel, Palestine, Huberman,
Sure.
AI, war,
Sure.
mental health. We're in like high stress situations, and there pretty much is nothing you can say that won't piss someone off.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, look, let's, for anybody who started to get worked up at when I just said that there's no causative data, that is not to say that people don't have bad experiences on social media, right? Like if you go onto Instagram and you see a bunch of stuff that pisses you off, yeah, you just had a bad experience. But that's the same as going to a dinner party where somebody says something that pisses you off, right? Like let's just not confuse kind of systems of information distribution with individual bad experiences. Yeah, you can have a bad experience on social media. I've had plenty of bad experiences on social media. You can also have good experiences on social media. My wife right now, her name is Jennifer Miller. She writes books and is a freelance journalist, and actually has been working for the last almost year now on a book. It's really fascinating where she is, it's a young adult nonfiction book. So it's written for young adults, but it's real, it's reported. She's been spending the past year following 3 high school kids with different mental health issues to just get a year in their life and what they do and what's their interaction with the mental health services. And it's been really, really interesting. And when we talk about this with friends, one of the first questions that they always ask is, oh, well, social media must be a terrible problem, right? Like that you must see that all the time. And my wife, who actually is not, my wife does not like social media. She's not on social media. I mean, she has like accounts, but she doesn't use them. She doesn't check them. She said that actually, very interestingly, like it's far more nuanced when you actually spend a year with these kids and see what their experience with social media is. Yeah, sometimes it's bad, right? Like sometimes one of the kids that she was following like was bullied on social media, but also that same kid then used Instagram to share how much this has hurt him, and it rallied an incredible number of people to him, and then he used social media to find a community that he's connected with. It's just like everything, and this is the primary point that I'm making throughout all of this. Like just like everything, it's just more complicated. It's just not a simple narrative about anything.
Sure.
The thing with the Facebook depression, which was reported as a true condition, go back to news of 2011, you'll just find all these reports about Facebook depression. It was really never more than speculation. Is it true that teenagers with depression are on social media? Yeah, that's true. Is it true that teenagers with depression are on social media and have bad experiences and it makes their experience worse? Of course. But is it true that like Facebook causes depression? No, it's not. It's just, that's not a verifiable thing. And so if you simplify a problem, you're unable to identify proper solutions. And the case with the Facebook media or the Facebook depression thing is like, when that problem got simplified down to Facebook causes depression, it led some parents to conclude, well, then I got to get my kid off of Facebook. But there's another way that it could have gone, which is that a teenager could have depression, could be on Facebook, and could have found a very productive community and could have found peers that, unlike the people that they're meeting at school, who could be really useful to them. And again, I'm not saying that that's the only outcome, but I am saying that is an outcome. And if you simplify the problem down to Facebook equals causing depression, then you're possibly taking a useful tool away from these teenagers, which is why we just have to have more complex understandings of these things and treat them as more complex, because Facebook or social media is not the only thing that happens in somebody's lives. Think about the last 10 or 15 years and what else is happening in the lives of young people. It's a lot.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of economic instability.
9/11,
Which can,
and then
which
we
can
had the
break up
recession.
families.
Yeah.
Yes, there's
Yep.
just there's endless things that are happening in people's lives. It's very hard to separate. Just because something seems new doesn't mean that it is the sole cause or even a cause of a thing that you're seeing. So I'm not here to tell you that like social media is perfect. It's very clearly not. But I am here to tell you that it's a far more complex story than we often give it credit for. And that when you spend a lot of time with teenagers who are on social media, yes, some of them will have only bad experiences. Some of them will have only good experiences. A lot of them will have a complex mix of experiences. And a lot of what they're experiencing is not like, it wasn't created by Mark Zuckerberg. It's just a reflection of what life already is, just kind of amplified and recorded. And we should keep that in mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Such amazing information. The last question I have is, again, with lots of stress, and I'm not saying that now is different than 10 years ago, but it just seems like there's a lot of like gotcha games, right? Like the guy who was on your social and like who's wrong. So I'm just wondering, like, people always think there's a better story to make someone wrong or bad. Where do you think that comes from? And do you agree with that?
Well, you're bringing together a lot of possibly disparate things that we're seeing, right? So, like I said, my thesis of the case there is that I think that a lot of people are missing something. We're all missing something, and it drives us to make decisions and to pursue things that we feel like are going to fill that gap. Some of the most famous people, some of the most famous thinkers. I mean, I have access through Entrepreneur to a lot of very, very noteworthy people. And if not them, then a lot of friends of theirs. I hear some bad stories, people who are just not kind, who clearly have just a hole in their lives. I mean, it's, why does someone come out of somewhere and just like become famous on social media? I mean, sometimes it's by luck. Sometimes it's because something is missing. It's just missing in their lives, and they're trying to fill it with fame. All of that stuff can be true. All of it. Like, the world is complex. We contain multitudes. Again, that's why it's like the drive to simplify things is just a problematic one.
Right.
You should create room in your life for tolerance for complexity. I just think a really useful way to think about things is, if you hear about something and it feels like knowing more about that would improve your life, then spend some time getting to know it. Talk to people. There are experts out there. They'll talk to you, or they've talked to somebody else. Genuine people who not just who like repeat things, right? A lot of people who go on podcasts, like health podcasts, and they'll talk about testosterone or whatever. Like, do you research testosterone in a lab? If you don't, I'm not that interested in what you have to say about testosterone. I'll wait for the person who researches it in a lab. Also, it's helpful to know the way in which you learn. I would imagine this is probably something that comes up in conversations about ADHD a lot. I learn almost exclusively from conversation. Like, I read books and I forget them. But when I talk to people and I'm able to ask questions, that's when the information becomes sticky for me. So I've optimized for that. If I want to know something and it's really important to my life, then I'm going to talk to somebody and try to understand it. And generally speaking, otherwise, if I read something and it's concerning, I think, well, that doesn't sound good. There's probably more to that story that I don't know. I'm going to have to make a decision about whether that's worth my time. And it's probably not, but maybe it is. And I'll spend some more time on it. People on Twitter who are yelling at each other, what's their incentive? I think their incentive is probably to make themselves feel better about something that's lacking in their lives. And it's your choice about whether to engage with that or not. I don't think that it's a really good use of time, but everyone can make decisions about how they spend their time themselves.
I like that. I like that. For you, it seems like you're separating the emotion from the information and seeing whether or not you want to learn more about it. And if you do, then asking reliable sources and kind of just sifting through the data rather than taking everything for face value.
Yeah. It's funny. I was at the airport waiting for a flight recently, and was next to this like retiree couple, and the husband was looking at some news site or something. And like this thing just kept happening, which is he'd be like, "Oh, did you see that, like, this is happening, and this person just said this," and the wife would be like, "Oh no, I'm gonna have to look into that." And I was like, "Why are you gonna look into that? What are you gonna gain from looking into that? Like, are you gonna solve the problem? Why are you doing that?" And I think that, like, for those people, that is, it's become a sport in a way. It's become something that they're doing to feel something, that they don't feel in control enough of the world, and they feel like kind of like digging into every terrible thing they hear on the news is somehow satisfying to them. I don't know what it is. And if that's how you want to spend your time, fine. All I'm asking is that you are intentional about how you use your time. Don't let something else or somebody else dictate how you use your time. There's a lot of distractions. Everything seems appealing to dive into. You have a limited time on this planet, and you alone get to choose how you spend that. And I would just say, whatever it is that you want to do with that time is what you should be doing, and don't lose control of it.
Yeah, I love it. You be in control of your day rather than the day running you with all the noise and notifications.
Yeah.
Jason, this is so valuable. Thank you for all of this. I knew that I was going to get a lot more than I thought, a lot of information that I didn't know about from your brain. And I know that this is going to land really well with a lot of people, because we all want to know how to find information and how to research what works for us and what doesn't work for us. We just want to be more productive and smarter humans. So thank you for adding to that with the valuable resources that you shared. If anyone wants to reach out to you, where can they find you?
Yeah, my pleasure. If you want to know more about me, you can subscribe to my newsletter. Is really the best thing to do. It's called One Thing Better. One Thing Better. Each week, one way to be more successful or satisfied at work and build a career or company that you love. And you can find that by going to the website onethingbetter.email. That, just plug that into the browser, onethingbetter.email, and it'll take you there.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for your time. I know it's valuable, and I hope that you get to be in control of the rest of your day and do the things that you love.
that's a high bar.
I feel like this.
Yeah. Well, this was a delight. I was very happy to do this. So thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Successful with ADHD. I hope it helped you on your journey. And if you need any additional support for you or a loved one with ADHD, feel free to reach out to us at coachingwithbrooke.com and all social media platforms at Coaching with Brooke. And remember, it's Brooke with an E. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.